Well, welcome to our first session in our afternoon. This is harnessing SharePoint to transform your teams from mediocre to great with David and Michael. My name is Pete Simpkins. I'm a board member here with the Minnesota Microsoft 365 user group, and I'll be helping moderate this session. A couple housekeeping items before we get going. This meeting is recorded, so just know that it'll be published, and we'll include all of the recordings out on our YouTube channel. We encourage everyone to go through and mute yourself as the presentation is getting started. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them into the chat, raise your hand. We'll have an opportunity for you to come off mute too if you're called on. That'll just help keep everything moving smoothly. If you need live captions, I'll turn those on so you'll have the option to use them on your end as well. In fact, I just turned them on for myself. And at the end of our session today, we'll be giving away a $25 gift card for participation within this session. So I'll be monitoring the chat and dumping names into some randomizer, and we'll do that drawing right at the end of the session if we have a couple minutes left over. At the very end, we'll post a link to the survey for our overall event. We do have a grand prize giveaway in which we're giving away a Surface Laptop Go. I do want to thank all of our sponsors for the event. We have a lot of great sponsors that help to ensure that we're able to do these workshop days and even our monthly sessions. So I just want to give a quick little thank you to everyone. And here's a link to that survey that I was referring to. I am presenting in PowerPoint Live right now, so you can actually click on that survey too. So go ahead and click on that if you haven't already started it. You only have to fill this out once, so that just means that you'll go through and select the various sessions that you've attended, provide some great feedback. It'll make it a lot easier for us to grow and continue to develop these sessions moving forward. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to exit the spotlight, and I'm going to hand it over to David and Michael.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Pete. Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to this session. Let me just share my presentation here, and we'll get rocking and rolling over here. So first of all, welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Michael, and I have David. David, hello.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. And this session we're going to do this a little bit differently because it's after lunch. So people are probably very sleepy. I know what it's like, it's cold. You have something kind of warm and you start to get a little bit tired. So again, the way that me and David typically run these things is feel free to think of this as free consulting. You have any questions at any time, put them into the chat and we'll make sure that we can answer them for you as well. We really want to make sure that we get as much value again as we can from this particular session. So again, just let us know, if we can help kind of in any way also, so we can make all of that happen. Again, thank you for the Minnesota people to have us, and we are going to talk about today how to leverage SharePoint to get the most out of Microsoft Teams, because what we see is a lot of organizations are deploying Teams especially, and then they're not making use of any of the SharePoint capabilities that there are, right? And there's a ton there. And really what we want this session to be is some really kind of simple best practices, tips and tricks that we've seen work particularly well for customers that can really help improve not only that SharePoint experience, but that Teams experience as well. So in some introductions, my name is Michael. I work for a company called Orchestry. We are an adoption and a governance platform for Microsoft 365, Microsoft SharePoint MVP. If you can't tell by the accent, Dave and I live in Canada. Dave lives in the very cold part. I live in the slightly warmer part in Vancouver. I've been here for about 15 years. I'm originally Australian. Used to be a chef as well. That's kind of my claim to fame. I used to work with a gentleman called Gordon Ramsay in London. Yes, before you ask, he did shout at me and as everyone a lot, but it was also an awesome experience. And this was before he was famous. This was like in 2000, 1999. Lots of experience again. If you have any questions for both myself or Dave, just feel free to get in touch with us. Like, I'm more than happy to share the notes and all of this sort of stuff as well. So we're pretty open about that. And Mr. Francoeur, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, not as interesting. I don't know Gordon Ramsay personally, but I'm David. I've been in the consulting space for a while. Also worked with Michael previously at Bonsai Internet. Now here again with him at Orchestry, and just love talking about this stuff. So you'll see, I'll probably light up a little bit once we start to get into some of the formatting stuff later today. But like Michael said, any questions are fair game. We'll do our best to answer. If we can't figure out the answer, we'll try to get you one. And we hope that you find this useful.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Want to do a sales job, a little about the company we work for. We're a governance, adoption, lifecycle management platform for Microsoft 365. One of the things that we do is provisioning. We provision lots of things across all of our customers. And so we kind of have a pretty, I guess, unique viewpoint on this, just because we see lots of different customers, what they're doing, and see things that work and see things that don't work as well. But if you're interested in Orchestry, just let us know. We'll be more than happy to give you a bit of a tour. Okay, today's agenda. First thing, we're going to talk about some session goals. The reason that we do that is that if you've come here expecting that this is an advanced, I don't know, purview data migration overview, you're going to be very disappointed. So we'll talk about some session overviews. Then we're going to talk a little bit kind of quickly about typically what we see within organizations. The first thing we're going to start upon is around document management. Now, the reason that we do that is most of the time people use Teams and SharePoint for managing documents, and people really aren't doing it properly. So again, there's certain things that we see across customers that can really help, things like metadata and views and defaults and all of that sort of good stuff. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll hand it over to David to talk about lists and libraries. Again, some formatting, some of the capabilities there. I think, again, a lot of out of the box stuff, but a lot of things that we see just frequently aren't used, but can provide an incredible amount of value. Then David's going to rock and roll and talk about designing SharePoint pages. Again, right? We see so many customers don't use SharePoint pages within their teams, right? To communicate things like project status, or maybe to use from a communication perspective. Again, there's lots of value there as well. And then finally, how you integrate all of these things into Teams, right? So again, we'll talk a little bit around how you can take all of these capabilities, integrate them together. So from your end users, you know, they're using this kind of really amazing workspace of capabilities where you have your channels and you have your tabs and all of your SharePoint sites are there and everything is integrated in. Q&A and social, again, Teams chat, please chat with us. If you want to contact us with Orchestry, this is all our Orchestry stuff, so feel free to kind of get in touch with us as well. Session goals. All right, so first thing we're going to talk about is document management. So really some of the goals we want here, really want to help you understand the document management side of that SharePoint Teams equation. We think that's really important. And we think, again, there's some huge amount of kind of benefits that we can get there. So we'll talk about that. Then we're actually going to talk about how you can kind of improve, I guess, the effectiveness of presenting information with some of these formatting capabilities. Again, a lot of this is going to be out of the box. We're not going to break out any custom code, but especially around Microsoft lists and pages, there's just so much that you can do. There's so many community examples there really to make that experience much better. So not just a simple SharePoint list, but a really beautifully formatted list for your users. Next thing, we're going to talk about how to integrate these things together. So again, you know, far too little organizations really don't do anything with SharePoint. And if they do, they don't really integrate it into Teams, and there's lots of ways that you can integrate these pieces together. But the biggest thing that me and David really want you to get out of this session is we want this to be practical, right? This is not going to be a high-level philosophical discussion with Dave and I. We really want to provide you with some practical examples that you can take back to your organization. And in that light, if you want the deck, we're more than happy to share it. Just ping us an email, and we're more than happy to share the decks. And we've got some other collateral that we can share as well. Everyone good? David, you good?
Yeah, we're good. And like I said in the chat, if the document management stuff for you is stuff you already know, it's really just a building block for the rest of the presentation. So bear with us, because we'll be able to do some really cool things once we have that kind of stuff kind of understood and we're on the same page.
And my Minnesota thing, being Australian, very, very good football team this year. NFL football doesn't make much sense to me, of course, not being from North America. But the Vikings are looking pretty awesome this year. All right, so let's talk about the first thing. Really kind of managing your documents effectively and Teams and SharePoint. And what we see overall with our customers, and keep in mind, I think last month we provisioned probably close to 25,000 Teams and SharePoint sites across all of our customers with Orchestry, so a lot. what we really see is people don't really make much use of those kind of document management additional features that Microsoft 365 provides through Teams. Now, as David said, we're going to go through a kind of a bit of a simple overview, and then we'll start to get a little bit more complex. So as you know, or hopefully you know, all document management in Teams is done through Microsoft SharePoint, right? When you create a Microsoft team, you're going to get a SharePoint site, and that SharePoint site is going to come with something called a shared documents library. That shared documents library is going to be where all of your documents are going to be uploaded if you, work with them through Microsoft Teams. Now, that's really where most people stop, and they kind of just use the shared documents library, but there's so much stuff that you can do. The other thing around that kind of Teams or that SharePoint experience or Teams and SharePoint experience around managing documents is you get a lot of goodness out of the box, right? So you get things like version history. So everything is going to be versioned through there. Metadata we can add. We'll talk about what metadata is and why you use it. Approvals, permissions. You can sync this stuff with OneDrive, Views, and a lot of other goodies as well. But as again, we see that most of our customers, they don't really do anything with this. And part of the reason I think for that is that, especially from a templating perspective, it can be a bit difficult to have all of this stuff templated out. There are tools that can help with that, of course. But again, a lot of people and a lot of, end users and power users might not have the capabilities around that. So there's 3 simple things that we think you can actually do and leverage around making that document management experience a little bit more useful and a little bit more powerful for your organization. The first, friends, is around metadata. Now, I know everyone uses folders. Everyone still loves folders. We like folders also. But again, I think metadata can really help you structure your content much more effectively. And one of the big misnomers I think we hear from a lot of users is that you either just use metadata or you just use folders. That's not true. You can use both. And we think using the both are going to give you the best chances of success. But really what metadata gives you is a whole bunch of additional capabilities, right? Around search, around being able to filter things, around views, all of these pieces. And it's really easy to get started. Problem with metadata is people think that you have to boil the ocean, right? So what people think is, you can't just have one piece of metadata like a document status or a document type. People think that in order for this to work effectively, you have to try to capture every single possible thing. And of course, no person on earth is going to go upload a document and fill in 5, 10, we've seen some customers with like 20 pieces of metadata. It just doesn't happen, right? You have to be pragmatic. 1, 2, maybe even 3 pieces of metadata, right, to help people understand what it is, get the metadata juices flowing. So later on, they might want to add their own columns, but at least helping them understand and helping them for a start. So in terms of metadata out of the box, you're going to get some good stuff as well, right? So the ID, the file name, the file size, the version. On the right-hand side here, you can kind of see all of the stuff that's tracked out of the box. So this is all stuff that you get out of the box, really, that Microsoft 365 provides. You're also going to get some really interesting stuff in terms of who this document was created and modified by, so the actual individual person. And then finally, the created and the modified date as well. So you're going to get those things as well. But there's other things that you can do. So again, I think a lot of customers struggle exactly what metadata is and how I should implement it. So again, there's some really common, simple rules. So again, depending on business needs, there is some common metadata you can implement across your entire organization. And we'll talk about that. Again, start off small, 1 or 2 fields, especially if people aren't used to metadata and they're very resistant to change. You bang on 5 fields of metadata in there and you make them required every time you need to upload a document into SharePoint. Those people are going to be using Box, so they're going to be emailing that stuff around, right? So again, make sure you're pragmatic in that approach. And some general rules, right? Try to use choice fields instead of text fields, right? Again, a choice can be a set of options that you can require. Keep the choices short, obvious, and obviously exclusive. We've seen far too many document status columns, which have got like 19 choices for document status. People just aren't going to do that as well. Some other tips you can do, if you're using dates, right? For instance, launch date or update date, for instance, you can in Microsoft 365 and in SharePoint default the dates to today, or even use a formula. And the other nice thing is you can actually use folders to default metadata based on location. So that can be a really powerful capability to say, if you upload a document into this folder, default this metadata to it. It requires a little bit of configuration, but it's definitely possible. All right, so what's the first piece of metadata that we recommend? Pretty simple. It's the document type metadata, right? Now, again, we think this is really useful because people are really terrible at naming documents. So half the time you have no idea what they are. And it's kind of an all-encompassing piece of metadata that you can use, and it has a real number of significant advantages. In terms of document types, this is the type of document that you're going to have. Contract, policy, procedure, all of that sort of stuff. It's not the actual format of the document. You're going to get those out of the box. It's also a great way to help people understand what a document is, right? Because here, if I look at this particular document library, it doesn't really tell me if I look at the name of this particular document what it is, but I've got metadata. So I can see that it's a report or maybe a scoping document, right? So really easy and really simple. The other thing where this gets really, really useful and really powerful is in a search scenario. Because remember, all of the metadata that you add can also be leveraged in Microsoft Search. And it's very simple to be able to go and create a search experience, which allows you to filter on the document type that you have. So you can go in and say, show me everything which is a contract or a report or a scoping document, for example. Now, all of these document types, of course, are going to be different to your organization. But of course, there's also going to be a bunch which are going to be similar, right? So things, contracts, policies, procedures, templates, reports, statements, invoices, order forms, all of this sort of stuff are pretty good examples that we see organizations use. Again, what we would recommend with these document types, probably have them within managed metadata, Dave. We would say that because, again, as this list grows, you can use a drop-down choice field, but I think after about 10 options, it's probably easier to use managed metadata, much easier to type those, and you get that type ahead search experience through there. But pretty easy and pretty simple, right? Someone goes in, they upload a document, they choose a document type, and away they go. If you want to get fancier, you can even, like I said, maybe within a SharePoint library, you can have particular folders which correspond to these document types, and you can maybe have the document type metadata defaulted. So if I go to, let's say, the contract folder within a particular SharePoint site, that metadata is going to be automatically applied. So that's the first one that we think is super, super important and super useful. The second one is also document status. Now, the reason that we do this is because I think everyone has been on an email where someone sent you a document called, budget 2023 _ final _ David's edits final brackets final, right? So that's really the reason why we essentially do that. Again, document status, another one, super simple, right? It can help you understand the life cycle of the status of the documents. Also, again, just really useful to understand, is it being worked on? Is it new? Is it in progress? For this one, we typically recommend something like a choice field. What's nice as well is the choice field capabilities now, and David will talk about this. You can have colors. Colors are good, right? Super, super useful. And you can also default it. So again, if someone uploads a document, you can also always default it to something like new, for example. Now, in terms of this document status, what are some of the things that we might want? So here's some examples, right? So simple status, new, in progress, waiting for review, final. Pretty easy, right? Pretty simple. I think this makes sense for most people. Again, you're going to have different types of rules within your organization, but again, this should help. If you've got things like approval processes, you might want to add a couple of additional steps in there, right? So new, in progress, waiting for review, review in progress, right? Rejected and approved for those status. And then I think you can go a little bit too far. Now, unless you're an organization that really understands these terms, right? Again, you can go a bit too far. So we've seen customers which have got like 15 different document statuses, and people have no idea what the difference between expired, voided, and decline is, for instance, right? Waiting on others. Again, if you have very well-defined processes, you can, but again, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. So I know this sounds, maybe kind of relatively simple to both of you, but just adding the document type And I think the document status piece of metadata, awesome. People can go in, they can add that status, they can see those things, and it makes it pretty easy. But now that we have this metadata, we got to use it in some way, right? And I think that's one of the things where a lot of people fell short with metadata. They do the adding of the metadata, but then they don't use the using of the metadata. And the using of the metadata in SharePoint in particular is where views come in. Now, again, views, if you don't know about this, think of views as essentially a way to be able to go and filter the content that you have within a SharePoint list or library. But if you don't really have any additional metadata, there's nothing really to filter on, right? So it's like going into an Excel file, having a single column and then trying to filter on that. It's a little bit pointless. So again, but because we've added this metadata here, we can go and add these pieces. And again, from a view perspective, just out of the box, there's a ton of really powerful capabilities. Filters, groupings, you can do calculations, for instance, if you have numeric values in there, display types, you can limit. There's a whole bunch of really, really good stuff just out of the box. And then when David comes on with his show of view formatting, then minds will be kind of blown here. But out of the box, there's a bunch of good stuff. Again, we feel that there's some views which should come out of the box with every document library because they're super useful. So what might those things are? The first view that we recommend you have is something called like a recently updated or recently updated documents view. This is really easy to set up. It's basically all of the documents shown without folders in reverse chronological order based on the modification date. Right? So it's a really nice way because if I'm working within SharePoint, and let's say I haven't been within that SharePoint site or that team for a day, a week, a month, or a year, I can essentially go in, click on the recently updated documents, and I can see them by reverse chronological order, regardless of how many, many depths of folders there are. So again, super simple, super easy. And what that would typically look like is something like this, right? So here we have a library, we have our document status field, we have an owner field, we have our recently updated documents, bang. I can go into here and I can see the stuff that's been updated in reverse chronological order. Simple, easy, effective. If you're like me and you go into one of these SharePoint sites and like, I wonder what's changed, this is perfect for you, right? It's going to give you that capability. The other view that we recommend people have is the created by me view. And the reason that we do this, and I think it's really useful, is if you're like me, you're probably incredibly forgetful and you have no idea what documents you're working on. So again, being able to go into a SharePoint site and at least see documents that have been created by myself is super useful. Again, really simple view. It's just all of the documents, again, shown without folders, where the current user or created by the current user is equal to me. Now, this is one of the tricks that M365 allows you to do, that if you put in the bracket and me, it's going to be dynamic. So if I log into that view, it's going to show all of the stuff that have been created by me. If David goes into that view, it's going to be all of the stuff created by him, right? So pretty easy, pretty simple pieces. Now, one of the ones that we hear a lot of, and this is what it would look like, right? One of the ones that we hear a lot of, and I would like to see, is like a view of all of the documents that I have edited, right, within a particular SharePoint site. That's not that simple, because if you do a view on, let's say, modified by me, the problem is, of course, if I modify it, that's great. But then if David goes and does a bunch of modifications, when I go in there, since I'm not the last person that modified that document, it's not going to be visible, right? So that makes it a little bit more complex here. But again, just to make it a little bit simpler, that kind of created by me view, really easy. You go in, see all of the documents that have been created by me, and you're kind of good to go through here. So again, really easy and really simple. And the last thing is grouped by. Now, again, this is one of our, I guess, favorite features. That ability to group things by the metadata or maybe even by the out-of-the-box fields can be really useful. But what we would say is if you're adding things like document type, for instance, and document status, right, it's really useful to be able to show this information in a really nice grouping. So one of the rules that we kind of espouse is for every custom piece of metadata you have, you should have a view that corresponds to that, right? So a great view could be, documents by status for our document status column, or documents by type for our document type column. Pretty easy. It's all of the documents that are grouped by metadata. Again, you can go into the views, you can choose group by, and they're going to group them all really nicely for you. So again, here we have an example of that. All of the documents grouped by document status, right? Super easy, super effective. Again, you know, you can expand upon these. This is all goodness you get out of the box in Microsoft 365. Again, there's no code and none of that stuff. So again, we think those kind of 3 simple things can really help in that document management experience. Of course, you can get much more fancy, but again, it makes that experience of managing documents different than people who just think, you know, SharePoint is just like a file share, right? Adding these views, adding that metadata can help move the needle to using some of those advanced capabilities also. The other thing that we also wanted to share, which we think is useful, is around some kind of SharePoint Teams and document management best practices as well. So this is particularly around Teams, right? And how do we make that Teams experience a little bit more effective when using SharePoint from that document management piece? And there's kind of 4 things that we typically do it. So one of the things is kind of viewing documents in Teams as well. Remember that if you click on the Files tab, right, all of the documents that you view are going to be available there also. Again, what I would say is typically we try to make sure that all of the contents within a particular team within that SharePoint site, they're not at that top level, they're underneath particular channels if you have them as well. The reason for that is if you don't do that, people have to go click back to go up a channel, and it can be kind of really, really confusing for people. The other thing that we also recommend is think about using channels, not just to break up conversations, but also to break up documents as well, right? So again, we find that can be really, really useful. The reason for that is if you start using these channels to break up these documents, if you go into a channel, so let's say we have a channel called deliverables, which of course is going to have a document, which is supposed to, it's going to have a folder called deliverables also. If you then go in and then you start a conversation within that channel, it's a really nice experience with M365 because if you share a document, it's going to default to that individual channel, right? So it's kind of within the context of that channel on that folder. So it makes it really, really simple and really easy. The other thing we should also recommend is if you have additional libraries apart from the shared documents library. So remember, it's only the shared documents library that's going to be available by default. If you have additional kind of libraries exposed as tabs, you can go and expose those as well. So if you've got additional libraries, you might have a library called shared documents. And if you have a library called, I don't know, secure documents, which have different permissions, for instance, don't just leave them within the SharePoint site. Make sure that you add them as tabs to your teams. Now, unfortunately, there's multiple ways for some bizarre reason to be able to add these document libraries. Use the SharePoint app. Don't use the document library app. Now, the reason for that is, again, that SharePoint app has got a bunch more capabilities. The document library app is kind of the older version of this. Yes, that seems very counterintuitive and very confusing. We know this. I'm sure someone at Microsoft has been informed of this as well, but it is the way that it is. So again, use that SharePoint app. And in that SharePoint app, there's a really nice UI that you can go and you can add additional pieces also. So again, makes it really quick and really simple. And again, the last thing that we would also say is exposing documents as tabs. This is an interesting one, but we think this is incredibly useful. So again, a couple of things that we would recommend. Both David and I have a deep disdain of the out-of-the-box Microsoft Wiki because it's awful and there's certain issues with it, right? So again, first thing is we recommend not to use the Microsoft Teams Wiki. You want to use something like OneNote, for instance, many more capabilities, much more features. It also has the added advantage that if you accidentally delete the tab, the OneNote is still going to be there. If someone actually goes and deletes the wiki tab, it goes into the ether forever. So that's another advantage. But if you're going to be using OneNote for your notes, make sure that your OneNote is shown as a tab somewhere, typically on the general channel or somewhere else that you have. The other thing that we also recommend is if you've got important documents, highlight them, right? Make them available as tabs in some of your channels in your Microsoft Teams. So if you're running a project, for instance, maybe you want to have a tab which has the project scope, right? Documents in there. If you're using a team to respond to an RFP, maybe you want to have the RFP response as a tab in your particular channel there as well. So again, it can be really powerful and really easy. Just a final thing before we wrap up this document kind of management side of things is also make sure you change the name of the tabs as well. So when you add it, typically it's going to take the file name. You don't need the .docx or the .pdf right there. Sometimes it'll use the name of the app. So the last thing you want is a tab which just says Word in it, for example. So make sure you change the name of the tab to something which is a little bit more descriptive about the document. All right, I'm gonna stop here. We get any questions, David, or we're all good for now? Oh yeah,
we've got quite a few,
right.
and there's maybe a couple for you to tackle as well. Yeah.
All right, I will stop sharing here and I will answer some questions. And by the way, people, I'll be answering questions. I'm not going to do what people usually do in meetings that I'm on Twitter or anything. I will be answering questions. If you have any questions, let them rip here, folks. All right, Dave,
all right.
over to you.
So I'm going to try to flash forward here to the part where Michael left off. So thank you for all the questions so far. There's definitely tons of meat to the document management piece. So we don't want to just skip over that, because I think a lot of these solutions crumble when they don't have that good foundation below them of some basic metadata, some basic good principles like views, right? But what about making this fancier? And this is where I get excited, right? Let's make this a little bit more fancy. Let's make this a little bit more interesting, right? So let's talk about lists and libraries. Very quickly, get this out of the way. What are libraries? What are lists? We store documents and files in libraries. Lists don't necessarily have to have a document. It can just be data. There's also this confusion now, I think, because Microsoft has pushed out something called Microsoft Lists, but don't worry about the difference. A Microsoft list is really just a SharePoint list that you can create outside of a SharePoint site. The capabilities that we'll talk about today are really on par for both of them. Whether you create it as a list outside of SharePoint or within a SharePoint site, you're going to get the same basic capabilities. Now, what are some examples of lists that I'll be alluding to quite a bit here today? An example of lists that I see people using quite successfully are things like a risk register or an issue log or a decision matrix or a management escalation tree or an asset inventory or equipment list. So all these types of database-like applications are great uses of a list. Now, why am I talking about formatting, right? Am I talking about like bolding and italics? No, not really. I'm talking a little bit further than that. And I think some people might ask, like, why would I even think about this, right? Like, it's not changing the underlying data. And that's accurate. But I think we always want to think about how accessible and easy to navigate and how scannable our content is. We also want to make that experience for users as frictionless as possible, right? So you'll probably hear me refer to friction a few times here. But ultimately, like when we look at a solution like this, where we're coming from a view like this, very boring, very dry, to me, puts me to sleep, can quite easily turn it to something like this with actually just very minimal effort. I'll show you exactly how to do that today and a lot more fancier things. And you tell me, just glancing at this, if you just glance at it for a split second, we're all in that scenario. Tell me which of these, how much information you've been able to absorb by a quick glance at this versus a quick glance at its counterpart. For me, it's night and day, right? I can immediately tell these impact levels. My eyes immediately go to the ones that are high. It's a lot harder to read that without looking very closely at the other list, right? And ultimately, we do still hear complaints, although I think it's starting to go away, this idea of, I want to make my solutions not look like SharePoint, right? This used to be a very common phrase we would hear in the industry. And so this kind of fits in line with that old trope. Now, there's three main types of formatting. And there's kind of like subsections within them now. Things are getting increasingly complex, but I'll try to clear that up for you today. We'll talk about the difference between column formatting, where we're formatting a field. So something, think of it as an Excel column, right? We're talking about things going down the screen for us most of the time in the traditional SharePoint sense. That's formatting at that level. We also have the ability to do formatting at the view level. So now that's what Michael was showing us, where we show maybe groupings or showing things based on a filter. We can format the view as well and make it look in a particular way for the entire experience, the entire list or library. And finally, we have form formatting, which is easy to trip over, where we can now format the experience within the form itself, the input form, the data layer where I can modify the entire list of metadata applied to a document or a list item. So I'll start with column formatting, and I'll work my way to the right here and give you some examples of each. And by the end, I'll stitch them all together, and that's when we're starting to talk about what are essentially mini applications almost. We're almost emerging out of just the traditional ideas of lists and libraries. So with column formatting, like Michael said, a really easy place to start is with choice columns. There's a built-in feature now to apply choice pill formatting, as they call it, to your choices. So you can automatically get a new color for every one of the choices you add. And you can even click into the configuration, this little icon here, and you can even do a little bit more. So you can actually add an icon, you can bold the text, change the color of the text. I've even added an outline around the pill to make it stand out a little bit more. Now, that's what you can do with kind of the interface that they give you. If you click through these screens, this is what you'll see. And you might be looking at this. I often look at this and scratch my head and say, why on earth did they choose these 20 icons that we can pick from this screen? Who chose them? Because I almost never need any of these, right? So if you're thinking, I would love to put an icon in, but none of these make any sense, I'll show you how you can swap in from hundreds and hundreds of icons instead. All right. So with column formatting, you can almost do what is almost magical, right? Like take a risk register that looks like this, that no one's going to be interested in, and frankly, people might just avoid, to something like this very easily, right? So I've changed the impact level and the probability levels to legend-based. You could also do this as bar charts going across the screen, something that is easier to scan. For an owner field, it's extremely easy to turn that into the person's profile picture, which can also work even in multiple multi-choice fields of people. You can have formatting applied to dates where it's dynamic, which is telling us, oh, we should make it red because it's overdue, or keep it gray or invisible if it's not overdue. And then we have some nice status pills here where I've put in some custom icons. You see they're not from that list of 19 or 17 or whatever that Microsoft gives us. They're from a much bigger list, which is easy to do once you know the way to do it. So what else can we do with column formatting? I inserted this example here. If there's anybody that's a bit more technical and just wants examples right away, here's an example of an idea. In our risk register, one thing that you might want to consider doing is actually making a clickable button that's attached to a Power Automate flow. So let's say in the context of this risk register, I have a workflow where if I click it, it's actually going to take my risk and it's going to move it into an issues list instead of the risk list, because it's no longer just a risk, it's actually an active issue on my project. So in this case, I have a nice little button here that I've made with formatting, and it just says promote to issue. I've chosen a little help icon beside it. I can even change the hover. So if I hover over this, I tell people what's going to happen. And it's only just a few little lines of JSON that you can modify within the experience. You don't have to be a developer. I am not a developer, I assure you. So that's something that's really powerful. Another cool example of this is something like request a status update, right? So let's say I've assigned this risk to Alan and he's overdue. And you know what? Instead of me sending him a message in Teams and rewriting all this and saying, hey, you're overdue on the sourcing of silicone, what if you just had a button here and all it did is it fired off a notification to Alan in Teams that said, hey, this list item, and put a link to it, needs your attention, right? And I actually use that internally. We have a portal that we use for our partners internally, and I have essentially like a prompt for update button in a lot of my lists that I can click on, and it shoots those people an update and asks them to come and update the information. So really easy. And this is just tricks that can kind of hardwire, kind of short circuit this idea of just having to manually reach out to people for information. We have better techniques at our disposal. Another thing that we can do, which is quite cool, which is always good for the user experience, which I'm showing in my little recording here, is you see that I'm in the screen from my previous slide. I'm clicking promote to issue, but did you know that you can actually customize the text that's shown up here as well as the text that's in the blue button? So instead of the blue button just saying launch flow or whatever the default text is, which might not make sense to anyone, you can actually customize these two text fields to be whatever you like. And it's quite easy once you know the format. Looks a little bit horrendous in JSON, but it's not too bad to do. And this now makes a lot more sense to someone when they're saying, oh, I completely understand now end to end what I'm actually doing, right? This can really help.
And round of applause, please, for David using a embedded GIF here in the presentation. I think
It's actually an MP4, I think, Michael.
Oh, was it? I think this is great. Great work.
Another example, another cool use of formatting is not just to make things display a certain way, but you can also use formatting to make the input of the information more easy for people. So remember Michael earlier said no one's going to populate like 10 fields. Even with 2 or 3 fields, you might have people saying, we're not going to update it because it's too annoying. You can use formatting in some cases to actually expose the editing experience right into the list. So here I have a date field, and instead of me having to open the item and edit the date and pick it from a calendar, I can actually just click these plus and minus buttons, and it will increment the day for me, or if I want to see the full calendar, I click this button. This is all done through formatting. Nothing is custom here. This is just JSON formatting of a SharePoint list. So lots of cool ideas here. This is just things to get the inspiration juice flowing on the column side. But I'll stop there. But trust me, there are hundreds and hundreds of samples out there. These are just ones that I find particularly useful. So let's talk about view formatting. So Michael talked about views and the value of views. We don't have to just stick with the old-fashioned way of looking at information in SharePoint like we used to with SharePoint on-prem, where we only had like a list view and we had to just make the best of it. We now have not only gallery views available, we also have a new board view available, which is available for lists. And with the gallery view, they even give you a card designer now, which used to be something that was like behind this wall of development. You had to be a developer to do it. Now you can literally pick some values from a nice little dialogue here, and I can quickly turn what my document list looked like before, which was like very similar to what SharePoint's always looked like, to now my document library looking like this. And you know what? This could potentially in some applications be much more powerful and useful to an end user seeing documents this way than just as rows in this endless table, right? And again, I haven't even touched any code here. Very easy. The board view is also quite interesting, and this is new, and it allows you to actually drag items between different columns, kind of like in Planner, right? So you actually have list items here aligned based on their status, and as I drag these items between columns, they will actually update the status for me automatically. So this can be great for like a Kanban-like experience where you're tracking tasks or something like that in a lightweight fashion in SharePoint. Another thing you can do here, here's just another example of where I happen to have a photo gallery, right? And I'm actually just using a document library, nothing crazy, to store some images, but maybe I don't want to just show them as basic, little tiles with all I see is the preview. Maybe I want to show a bit of metadata. Like here I'm showing the image source that I've tagged the image with, as well as these image tags, which by the way is an automatic feature now. SharePoint will automatically try to tag your images with some useful metadata for you, and you can surface those up using this card. Here's another idea. I really like this one because one of the things that I always try to avoid with lists and formatting is overwhelming people. I really want to direct people's attention to the things that they really need to focus on, right? So if you're on 10 different projects and you're bouncing between different document libraries, I know the pain of that very well. And the last thing you want to be doing is spending 10 minutes every time you context switch to try to kind of reacclimatize yourself with what is happening, right? So imagine a view where you're in a document library, and first of all, what's happening here is it's shading the whole row for me automatically in red to call it to my attention specifically, David, because it can tell that the sign-off status here equals pending, and the modified by is my name. So Adele, if she comes in here, will not see the same shading as me because that's not of interest to her right now. So I'm using this kind of call out to help draw my attention to the right items. I also have some formatting on one of these flow launch buttons, which I already talked about. You'll notice that I don't see the flow launch button on all these other ones because even if I could click on it for the other ones, it probably doesn't make sense for me to request approval on something Adele is working on, right? So I can actually eliminate all of that user error, just show the button where it makes sense for me when it's in a pending state and when I'm here. All of this can be done very easily with some conditional logic, right? So not hard. And this, when you look at this and you think about it, if you take a step back now, this is really almost just like a mini application now, This is more than just a list now at this stage, right? It's really almost like something you would consider an app when it's doing these types of things.
And it's no code, right, Dave? Like this, well, not that it's no
Very,
code.
it's a little bit of JSON, but it's totally supported, and there's tons of samples out there, including the ones here I can always share with you as well.
Yeah, and for those of you people who were used to try to do this in the old versions of SharePoint, where you had to use XSLT, which was like some dark, forgotten language. Again, this makes it much, much easier. So again, and then pray tell, David, how does one person get access to all of these fantastic examples of formatting that you have?
Oh, I will share. Yeah, we have a slide for that where we have a few great repositories. We can also share some of our specific samples as well. We'd be more than happy to share those.
Nice.
Now, another slide I've recently added, because this is, I think, very little communication has gone out to, in my opinion, around this feature. Another thing I find that can be quite overwhelming as a previous consultant with end users is this type of menu experience in SharePoint. What am I to make of this, especially as a new user, someone that's new to SharePoint? Why do I have a drop down for automate and also a drop down for integrate? And within integrate, I have power automate. Why is that not under automate? Like this menu, it's going to continue to change and it might get better. But oftentimes, a lot of these options are really not relevant in the context of certain lists or libraries, right? So here I am out of the box in my risk register previously, where I have export to Excel, automate, integrate, edit in grid view, things that I probably don't want my users to worry about. I can actually hide anything in here and turn this menu into a much cleaner experience that might be much more relevant to the current list. I can even rename the buttons and even change the icons. So you'll notice now instead of new button, it's now new risk. Instead of edit in grid view, it's edit risk. I have elevated the copy link button because that's something that someone might very well want to do from a risk register, is quickly copy the link to one of these and send it over to someone, and then delete. I think the rest of it is not really relevant for this list application. And this is called this is called the command bar customization that you can do with, again, pretty standard. Basically, you just specify for each of these buttons, do you want to show it true or false? And it's not much more complex than that. It's quite easy.
Yeah, I think this is awesome because I think, again, from a user adoption perspective, the top one here, I don't know, like what does that integrate button do? Like no normal person is going to know what any of that stuff is, right? And again, it's no code, but it's just such a simpler experience that Dave shows. Like the new risk, edit risk, it's awesome, right? Like it's so much cleaner and so much simpler. And again, I think I know me and David always talk about this. Like user experience is not, it's a sum of a whole bunch of very, very little small things to make things into something amazing. And like, again, like you said, David, it's almost like you can customize or create your own app, right? Without any of this stuff, just using some of these out of the box configuration pieces.
Yeah. Okay, and then we'll talk about the third and often forgotten, stepchild here in the array of formatting options. And the last one is form formatting. So we talked about formatting the columns, which is individual fields. Then we talked about formatting the view and how powerful that can be to call out certain elements in the view to my attention or make it into a card or make it more beautiful. We also have some form formatting that we can do. So this form that has existed in SharePoint and has kind of looks a little bit nicer than it used to, but let's face it, it's still just a modal flyout that's showing us the information. We can also customize this. So this is also something that I think is very underutilized and is extremely easy to change. So look at this here, what I have currently. You'll notice that it's pretty standard. You might have noticed this edit option where you can move things around. That's a good start. At least getting the order right of your columns can help people a lot. But imagine being able to do this. This again is supported out of the box. It's not difficult. I've added a header to every one of my items, which you can customize. You can even add an icon. You can create sections to group different pieces of metadata together that are more relevant or more related. So you see here I have a details section and then I have a category section. So I've really cleaned up the view experience of my item here by grouping them into logical groupings for people. And then I've added a footer. The footer is also interesting. You can add, like I've done here, something that's like a help help reach out option here. I'm confused by this, or I need help, or, I don't understand this information. The footer could really be whatever you like, right? So this can really help clean up that experience in the form and make it shine, make it a lot more powerful. Yeah, and you could add instructions, definitely. That's a good way to use the footer, I would say, probably. It's a great place to put instructions. Yes. Now, this is not technically form formatting, but I don't really have a good place to put this anywhere else. And I also think that this is underutilized. So remember, again, we keep saying the same things, but Michael mentioned a really, really strong point. If you want to get adoption on any of the metadata you've done, you got to make sure that you're not flooding people with things that they don't need to see or that they don't care about. And I think one thing that can help with that is not necessarily saying that, well, one size must fit all for metadata for my list. You can actually conditionally format some of your columns to show them to certain people or only show them in certain circumstances. So I have an example of both of those here, where in this case, I have a form, and if my impact level or my probability level are 2 or below, then I do not have to fill out a mitigation plan. But as soon as this one is switched from a 2 to a 3, or this one from a 2 to a 3, one of these fields goes from hidden to visible. And you see my formula here. It's not crazy. You can copy and paste it. It's quite simple. Once you've tried it once, trust me, you will not find it hard. It's basically a true or false. If any of these are above 3, show this. If not, hide it, right? Another application of this could be maybe there's a field that only some people should see, right? So like here, maybe I have a PM or project manager notes field. Really, it's just for the project manager. No one else needs to see that information. It's not relevant. It's noise for everyone else. You see here, I just have a formula that says if the current person is not the project manager, hide this field like I have on this side. If that person is who I am, then show me that field. So you can use some of these tricks to not only use metadata, but use it more selectively, more dynamically, and I think get overall much better adoption on these features.
So David, some questions from the crowd here, and I'm answering them, and I want to make sure that I'm not telling people the wrong thing. So one of the things, I think it was Brian, can you hide for certain groups? I think this is, what were we asking about? Buttons. Can we hide the buttons for certain groups? So in the command bar thing.
No, not in the command bar. Not in the command bar. The command bar,
Perfect.
there's no support currently for like security trimming that I'm aware of.
Got it. Perfect. Next question from Salmon Tom here, or Salmon Tom. Sorry if I butchered your name there. For the form, can you add instructions in the header underneath the heading text? You can, right?
Yes, I'm quite sure you can. You just might want to think about, is the header or the footer the better place? But yeah, ultimately you can basically punch pretty much anything in there that's simple like that.
Perfect. And from Josh, is there any way to change the number of columns in a formatted form? Hang on, and I answered, hang on, because I think I butchered this. No, Josh is asking, I mean, changing from a 4-column layout to say a 3-column layout instead. Yeah, I think you can do that, right?
I believe that this tries to size itself automatically, actually. I don't think you can control like whether I would want it to move this last updated up to this row. I don't believe that you can currently specify. I could be wrong, but I believe it kind of, the limit of the control you have is what group is it in and what order is it within that group. If it's a 3rd or 4th column in there, I don't think you currently can.
Got it. Josh, let us know, mate, if that's what you're asking, or if we're off base here.
All right, so some quick takeaways, and then we're going to do some cool stuff. We're going to take some of this and assemble this into pages and really start talking about apps. So like I said, start simple, start with these ideas of, if you've never done this before, easiest place to start is with a choice column. Take that little pill formatter a little step further, add some color to the text, add an icon. Once you've done that, then you maybe step into looking at how do you then customize it to a custom icon. That's an easy step to make from that to another. You don't have to do this all at once. You don't have to jump to the fanciest solution you've seen on the web. You can start with these little things, get comfortable with the kind of basic principles of how they work, and you'll find that you can then quickly evolve. The evolution from there is very fast usually, right? Once you've done a couple of simple ones, you'll feel good about going forward. So some of the takeaways here, I would suggest, we'll of course share this slide. There's some really good examples out there. The kind of one of the main speakers in this area on formatting is a guy called Chris Kent. He's got an awesome website. He shares all of his stuff very freely. He also, I believe he's the one behind this Flicon site, which is a way to search.
Yeah,
for,
that's him. Yeah, it's
yeah.
exactly.
This is a really useful tool, actually, because if you're like me, you're looking for an icon, you're going to type in something that makes sense to you. So if you're looking for a dog, you're going to type in the word dog. It just so happens that the icon that Microsoft has available for a dog is named something completely different from dog. So you'll never find it. So unless you're going to scroll through hundreds of icons, you'll never find it.
But it's named cat.
It's
probably named cat.
It's something like, it's something really silly, right? So what you can do is, this site here will help you with a little bit better search so that you can find things like dog with a much more reasonable search query, okay? And you can go quite crazy with the formatting, right? I didn't even show you like super highly advanced examples like this one here, where I can hover over a picture and it shows me a pop-up, which gives me a dynamic view of the current status. I mean, there's lots you can do even well beyond what I'm showing here, okay? So let's talk about SharePoint a little bit now. I've talked about, okay, lists and libraries. We've built up from the basics. Now we've done some formatting. Now, what about SharePoint? This webinar is about SharePoint, right? And making SharePoint kind of a star in our team's success. And I think one of the things we have to use in that SharePoint toolkit is this really great design canvas that we have available to us in SharePoint, which we do not have an equivalent of in Teams, right? We can create pages in a very flexible and quite intuitive way now in the modern experience in SharePoint. And I really do think of it as kind of this pretty open-ended canvas for me to really control and curate how people see certain pieces of information. So what I'm going to do now is show you how some of the things that we've built at the list and library level, now we can actually bring up a whole level into a page alongside other information and create almost like mini dashboards, right? So what are some pages we would throw at you to think about, right? We want to try to give you some concrete examples. So definitely one of the prime candidates to start with is customizing the welcome page. There's also a news archive page that every site gets by default. You just need to know the link to point people to it. Maybe a team member page or a team tasks page could be useful. Perhaps a project status page. A document navigation experience. It's maybe a little bit different than this folder-based experience. I'll show you what I mean by that, and maybe some help, right? So there's a lot we can do. Let me just show you some examples, and then we'll go in from there. So what about a home page here? Instead of just that plain basic version that no one likes, that's completely useless, that you get out of the box, you can easily turn your page for a project, for example, into something like this. Maybe the title, description, picture, some useful links here. I even have a little Gantt chart web part. You can make it what you need it to be and templatize that in a way that so everyone that's on any project is going to see a very similar experience. The news archive page is there, right? It's already there. You don't have to rebuild it. I would suggest you don't try to rebuild it, actually, because it's already there and it works quite well. You just need to be able to point people to this. So if you're publishing news on your site, a great thing to do, and I'll talk about this in Teams, is how do you point people to this, right? Because if you want to catch up on news that's happened on a site, this is actually probably one of the most effective ways to do that, right? So just point people to this page. Another useful one on projects or departments could be a team role. So here I have a project roles page where I have people cards, right? And I just have them identified under what their role on the project is. So I know who the engineers are, who's doing QA, who are the BAs. This just makes it simple, more of a self-service experience rather than me trying to, either run down the hall or find the right person to ask on Teams for who is the other BA on this project, right? Team tasks is another one here. This is someone I think already asked. This is actually a Gantt web part that comes with Orchestra because everyone loves Gantt charts, we know. And so showing planner tasks in a Gantt view or also in a filtered view on a page can be very powerful. It can immediately turn information that you already have into essentially a personalized dashboard for an end user, right? So this can be very useful. A project status page can be tremendous. I used to be a project manager many, many years ago. I think I did it for 1 year. I didn't last long. And, one of the annoying things that I found annoying was constantly being asked about my project status. And, have you sent out the latest project status update? Okay, well, what if the project status was just a place that people came to instead of me having to send out this, email once a week? What if it was just a page? And what if everyone that even was interested in my project had access to this page and it was pretty much always up to date? They could come here, they can see the status, it's green, on budget, on time. I have my risk register. Remember that list I showed you previously? I've now embedded it on a page. So it's now just a piece, a modular block in a much larger page. I'm reusing it here, so I'm getting more value from it. I might have some project leadership callouts here and maybe a summary of the team tasks. I have a really great project status dashboard here using SharePoint with very little effort. Another one that I like to show, because again, it's one of these, like, I think just unknown gems, is this document browser, document navigator experience, whatever you want to call it. If you're someone or you've worked with someone that's ever struggled with a folder structure in any platform, you know this pain, right? That if you don't understand the folder structure, it makes it very hard for you to find information. And that problem really is still very pertinent today when Teams creates a folder for every channel in that team, right? We know that. And then people might add additional folders on top of that. So I always find giving people an alternate way to find that information in a flattened view can be very, very powerful. This is completely out of the box. This is two SharePoint web parts paired together. Nothing custom. I literally have a list here that is essentially serving as filter buttons. So I can click on these, and these are going to dynamically filter my library below and show me things that match that metadata. So anything that has QA in its project activity field will get shown here when I click this button. Right now I've clicked on analysis, so I'm seeing all the analysis related documents. And I just find this can be a tremendous alternate path for someone that's struggling with the channels, can't find the information. They can come here, they can find everything in a single place, and you give them some flexibility in how they get to the information rather than forcing them down a single tunnel or a single road, right? This again, it's just built on that formatting basic stuff that I've already discussed, right? So we kind of build up from formatting. We've added some custom column formatting here. We've added some custom formatting here. We've paired them together. Now, this is not a search experience per se. If you wanted to do a search experience, I'd probably look at something like P&P Modern Search, which is a set of 4 additional web parts that are from the community that is essentially replacing that old classic search experience where you could have a search box. But this sort of thing can be done with keyword searching and kind of free text entry and stuff like that using those web parts. But I don't talk about those today. So in terms of prioritization, I would say think about layouts. It's a really good idea to think about not necessarily, again, doing everything at once. Think about the top candidates for you. Maybe it's that project status page, and think about, let's prioritize that. Let's get that out to all of our project managers, and let's get some consistency established. I would definitely recommend you first take a smaller amount, get it consistent across the board, rather than try to do too much and have it go out and become very inconsistent very quickly. Right, that consistency can be very, very important in your overall success. So there are some resources here as well. The SharePoint Lookbook is one that's always growing and evolving, and it gives you some great, I would say, more inspiration type resource than anything else. Good ideas that you can pick from, so you can have a look. Oh, I like the way they've laid out these 3 web parts together. I'm going to do that too. To me, that's where the real use of the lookbook is, rather than just copying as is their templates, because often they're very complex, more complex than I see most people will really need. There's also a great video from the SharePoint team about building beautiful pages in SharePoint and some good practices on things like weighting of information and also effective use of white space and things like that. It's a great video, which is this one here. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it.
And we can share ours as well here. So David, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break because you've been blasting here for a while. And for everyone else, it's break time, friends, for a minute or two. And we have a question here. So, not being from Minnesota, what is the traditional food of Minnesota? Like what is it? What's the thing? In Quebec, for instance, it's poutine, right, Dave? We would say that from a French Canadian perspective. In New York, it's hot dogs. But what's the traditional thing?
Hot dish. Everyone's saying hot dish.
Tater, geez, okay, I guess it's hot dish. So someone explain this to me. What I can say, tater tot. What's a hot dish? Is it like a casserole? It's a casserole, right? Thank you, Nicole. This is true. And is there anything particular, or just it's whatever's cooked in a casserole is this hot dish
with tater tots?
With tater tots. Wow, this is all right. This is great. So, all right, hot dish, huh? I never knew that. There we go. That's awesome. All right, well, thank you for this quick break, David. Let's go back to the predefined programming here.
All right. Okay, so we talked about SharePoint, the value of SharePoint, where the document management magic is really happening. We talked about the formatting options that are available there. We talked about how that can be just more than just about styling, right? It can actually be about usability, right? Which is a much bigger thing. And then we've also talked about how can we take these blocks and now create whole dashboards or miniature applications using SharePoint kind of as our canvas, for lack of a better word, for assembling them in a way that we would like. But what about now Teams, right? Because there should not be this thought of it's SharePoint versus Teams, right? They're not fighting each other. Although I think that is often confusing to a lot of people, right? This idea that SharePoint is somewhere I need to go to other than Teams. It's a different place, right? I think what we need to think about more is how can we utilize those SharePoint tools and then bring them into the Teams experience, right into people's day-to-day, right? So rather than SharePoint being this place to go to, bring that place into Teams. It works very well, and it's actually very easy to do. And especially if you've done a little bit of this assemblage, like I've shown you already, you'll have these full featured experiences work exactly the same way in Teams. And that's the great part about it. So let's say this project status page. Well, a great place for that to be would be as a custom tab in my general channel of that project, right? A project status tab. Click on that and I see it in its full glory. What about my task list? Maybe I have a task list or I have a risk register here. You see the risk register. I keep showing you guys this risk register over and over. Here it is again in Teams, right? I don't have to shoot people away out of Teams anymore. I can just say, here it is. You can actually launch the workflow, change the metadata, do everything you would normally do right from within Teams. So this is like a great way to tie these two solutions together, right? Another option here, just showing you some ideas here. We have the idea of a list, just showing it in the board view. We can also integrate our planner plans very easily. We always recommend this at Orchestry, right? You know, if you have any planner plans, bring those as tabs into your Teams because this is a great place for people to get to that information, right? Formatting views, one quick warning on formatting views, and Michael touched on this earlier. There's a lot of tabs you can add up here, and they're very confusing because a lot of them overlap. Like there's this tab for document libraries, which you would think would be the right one to use. Well, it's not. It doesn't really work very well. If you try to add it, you'll have this heartbreaking experience like I had once where I did all this beautiful formatting in my document library. I came into Teams and I said, aha, I'm ready to reveal this to the world. And I add the document library tab only to see that all my formatting was gone. And I thought, what have I done? I've just wasted an hour of my life I will never get back. Well, it's actually just because you're using the wrong tab, and who would know it? But you just should use the SharePoint tab here instead, and all your formatting will be there. It's just like one of those weird things. Hopefully they align these tabs and make it a little bit easier for us. Here's an example of the status page shown as a tab. We also have, you know, my document navigation experience sample I showed you earlier as a page in Teams. Again, don't have to shoot people away. Here I have a custom tab. This is the Orchestry custom team information tab, which shows you kind of at a glance information about your team. This could be anything though. This could be a tab for a Miro board or an Asana task board or something else, right? Great examples of uses of custom tabs. And this is really a segue into a whole other discussion, which is like Viva connections. And I know there's other sessions on this, but kind of playing into that larger discussion of bringing information into Teams, because Teams is that hub and it's going to become more and more of a hub, especially with all the Vivas. Viva connections is a really easy way to pull in your intranet into Teams as a custom tab with a custom logo. It's very easy to do. You can create these custom tiles in the dashboard, which is really nice. And you can quickly create an intranet now with actually, you know, no development. This is just me just adding some imagery to some of the web parts that are now on offer. So there's a lot you can do to, you know, not just get kind of the most out of SharePoint, but also kind of almost like doubly capitalize on that investment by bringing it into Teams as well, because it's going to get that much more presence and viewership by being in the solution that people are using likely kind of day to day all the time. So our key takeaways here on integrations are, you know, think about if you're using channels, if nothing else, make sure you're not just using the general channel, right? Try to use some other channels, and within each channel, add some tabs. You don't have to go crazy and add 20 of them because most of them will get hidden, but think about a couple of useful pieces of information for each channel, right? That would be useful. So for example, for the general channel, maybe you want to point to the welcome page for the SharePoint site, or the news archive, or maybe the meeting notes from OneNote, right? They're straightforward. They make sense in the context of the general channel. For other channels, this is kind of, you know, dependent on your channel structure, but, you know, you can make these kind of crazy leaps here, and which I say sarcastically. Let's say you have an issues channel, maybe you'll show the issues list on that channel as a tab, right? So there's lots of things here just to get kind of, again, the juices flowing. Depends on what you're doing, what your structure looks like, but there's lots of opportunity there that I think is just going untapped. And finally, remember that you can leverage, there's, I think, literally hundreds of different third-party integrations now that are supported as tabs in your Teams. So you can bring those in, and they can be, you know, you can now create this much better hub-like experience for your project or your department or your collaboration workspaces by pulling all of these disparate sources of information into a single place, which can be that team. So I will leave it there. I think we're doing pretty good on time. I think we have some time for questions, and we need to leave a few minutes as well at the end for the draw. Michael, any questions that are unanswered here?
Well, no, I meant the most important question of what is a hot dish has been answered. Bit of controversy here in tater tots as well, so that was great. No, I think does anyone else have any questions here? Oh, Tony, does that imply there's an unofficial, unsupported way? Okay, yeah, let me send this over to you people. So this is, I don't know if this is officially supported or not. That's one way. I know a couple of people asked about this, Dave. They're asking about, can you remove the Teams file, the Teams file tab from a channel? Now, I've seen this work. I also have seen this break things terribly. So I would say good luck. There is, Tony, another way, which is hacked, which does work, but I'm not going to share that because it's a brutal hack, which we're not in the business of sharing. But if you email me, maybe we can get it over to you. But either way, there's not a good way. I mean, I think there is, it's just really problematic as well here. David, question from Brian. Thoughts on making some metadata required?
I think it's a very good idea. You have to think about this when you're thinking about that delicate balance of how much metadata you're going to launch with. Some of that, maybe even all of that, should be required. One of the reasons is otherwise you're going to find that people are going to just be throwing a lot of things into the system, not even realizing that metadata should be required. If you don't make it required, it's really difficult to prompt users or give them that nudge. We don't really have any more flexibility in our levers today to say like, hey, would you mind filling this out? Unless you do some kind of third-party customization or you know, first-party customization with Power Automate, sending out reminders or something, which you could do. But generally speaking, I think some level of required is nice, but think, again, just be very careful. If you make too many fields available and then too many of them are required, you will get people that will stop loading things into the system, and that's counterproductive. That's working against what we're trying to do, right? So I think definitely agree with required. Just think about it very carefully. Make sure it's not going to be something that's going to get your users very frustrated. And just, you know, think and plan is the best you can do. And then use feedback as an opportunity to tweak that if you need to.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really depends, I think, Brian, on kind of where your organization is. You know, we see, I mean, I'm sure everyone's like that, right? People just want the easiest way to do the easiest things. So again, that metadata does look like an extra step for people. So it can be kind of annoying. And I was going to say the same thing as well, Kellen. Yeah, I think if you've got required metadata and you do multiple document uploads, it kind of, I think it puts them in that unchecked, I think it goes into unchecked state, right? So then that's a huge pain because no one else can see it because the documents are checked out and they're not in there, and that can become pretty painful. So there definitely is some things there as well. Any other questions? I know that's a lot of info. Have people found this useful or not? This presentation, and please be
Brutally
honest here. I know David's Canadian, so he takes criticism far more personally than I do. I'm Australian, so we really don't care. But no, we want to make sure that it's useful. And if you've got any suggestions of what might be improved, just feel free to put them in the chat, or again, just feel free to email us as well. Just before we wrap up here, so David, if I'm an attendee, how do I get this presentation? What's the best way here? They can email you, me, either of us.
They can email us. I've also uploaded it to the MN365 shared space where all the speakers are supposed to upload it to. So presumably that will be shared with you guys as well. But if you want the actual slides themselves, I don't think we mind sharing them. You can just reach out to us if you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. And some of the more kind of options that Dave showed about, which aren't available as well. If you get the slide and you're really interested in those, just ping us an email and we'll send that over because we've got all of that content available. If you're interested in Orchestrate, our tool, which allows you to template all of this and more really, really easily and really simply, and a bunch of other cool features, again, we would love to speak to you as well. All right. Anything else? David? No. By the way, next week, Thanksgiving. So that was going to be my other question about how do people do their turkeys, because that's also fascinating to me. But I think the hot dish thing is this is great. This is something new. Perfect. Dave, anything else? Do we want to do the draw or do we do the draw? Was Pete doing the draw?
So I think we hand it over to Pete. Yeah.
All right, Pete. This is all you.
I can hop back in quick, but I'll pull up a quick link for our survey that we're going to ask everyone once again to complete throughout the day. This is a single survey that you need to fill out to be entered into that drawing for that Surface Laptop Go. It's also going to be how we measure and provide feedback back to all of our speakers. I will actually pass the baton over to the two of you. If you had a person that asked a particularly interesting or challenging question or so on that you would like to give the gift card to, I can do that. Otherwise, I can run a random drawing.
Let's do a random one because there's a bunch of. I mean, this is. Hey, now, Pete, since you're on the call, explain to me: is this real, this hot dish thing, or are these people having a laugh at our expense?
No,
all right.
no, it's completely real. In fact, we even had a restaurant that was pretty well known. I think it was a James Beard restaurant called Hot Dish that was huge in downtown Minneapolis. So it's definitely a staple.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, now we've got turkey conversation. So this is great. Yeah, and by the way, the deep fried turkey thing, I think my most enjoyable part of American Thanksgiving is then watching the social media posts of people lowering their half defrosted turkeys into their deep fryers and then watching it go on fire. So that's great.
All righty. So I have our winner for the session, and it's going to be Sherry Satterstrom.
Sherry, congratulations.
Awesome. Sherry, I looks like I got your email already from registration, so we'll go ahead and we'll get that sent over to you.
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. That's great.
Alrighty. Well, I don't have anything else to add. I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording here. That will